Well, friends, hello again. You know what it's time for? It's time for me to do an everyday task and talk about movies, you see. And so that's what we're going to do. We're at the gym right now. I've got about 10 minutes of, walking, running, that kind of thing. And so I kind of want to just sort of, quickly run through some of my favorite films of the last year, because it's been a pretty good year for cinema, you know. We'll just mention Furiosa up front, because it is, of course, my favorite film, but I've talked about that enough for now. But let's see. It's been a really great year for film. In fact, it's been so great that I can't really think about offhand what it is that I've seen. I can tell you that outside of Furiosa, I think my next three favorite films this year were The Bike Riders by Jeff Nichols. Now, Jeff Nichols, of course, is always great. Like I say, Mud, amazing film, as well as Midnight Special, which I think is probably my favorite film of his. It's just a really great, tiny little science fiction fable. But The Bike Riders is just really pure. The Bike Riders is an actor-based film, but the great thing about it is that it doesn't spare on visual storytelling. You know, it is a period piece, but it's not overstated in the way that so many glossy, big studio productions usually are. One thing I really liked about it too was the fact that it kind of examines in its own way the effects of media influence, had and did have on, biker groups, things like that, because, the Hells Angels were influenced by Marlon Brando, and so in this film, Tom Hardy's character is influenced by Marlon Brando, and I think that's really interesting. Austin Butler, of course, he's fantastic. Jodie Comer, fantastic. It's just a powerhouse of performance, really, and filmmaking. There is a bit of it, I think, that is maybe, along with the Marlon Brando and the Wild One conscious influence in the film, there is a little bit of it that, feels influenced by, Martin Scorsese films, of course, I think. It's really, really fantastic stuff. Challengers by Luca Guadagnino. Now, I gotta tell you, I like the film a lot, but one thing I'll say about it is that, of course, as we all know, it's a very specific subject that it's dealing with, which is the high-powered world of tennis players, right? Now, I don't know dick about tennis, if you ask me. It's not a sport that I've paid any real attention to in my life. That's not to disparage it, but I just, I just don't. What's interesting about this film, along with a lot of Luca Guadagnino's other films, is that, it has these certain specific ideas about sexuality. And one thing I liked about it is, as everybody who knows me knows, I'm a very proud bisexual man. And this movie is a very proud bisexual movie, okay? And one thing I like about it, one thing that kind of bugs me when it comes to bisexuality in cinema, is that we're often presented as kind of like the home wreckers, or, the people who are just gonna, fall into disarray and disaster. We don't have everything aligned because, if we did, we would be, monosexuals, or however you want to define it. But this film isn't just, one character's bisexual, and that's how it is. The whole movie's bisexual, and the entire triad relationship at the center of it, brilliantly performed, of course, with Zendaya at the center, and she's great, is incredibly optimistic. Even though, of course, there's tension and conflict and all of this, at the end, it all comes out to something rather positive, which that was great to watch, that was great to see. And the filmmaking itself, I don't know how typical this is for Luca Guadagnino, because I actually have only seen Suspiria, and I don't have very positive feelings about that remake, personally. But his filmmaking is rather kinetic and poppy, which are words, of course, that you all know that I love. But, great movie, great stuff. I think another one, clearly, of my favorite films of the last year was Dune Part 2 by Denis Villeneuve. Now, there are some people, I think, who believe that Villeneuve, or however you like, I'm sorry, that's going to keep happening, is too literal-minded of a filmmaker, or that he's empty, or whatever. Those people are wrong, all right? his filmography is probably one of the strongest of the, newer class of filmmakers, and he is one of the newer class of filmmakers after Nolan, who he exists kind of in the same wheelhouse in. But in particular, his two Dune films are very clearly passion projects that he's dreamt up for years and years. We all know the story. Now, I'm not a Dune loyalist or a Frank Herbert loyalist. In fact, I think after Dune Messiah, the series gets pretty messy and kind of unfocused. I mean, what are you going to do, right? But some of the changes he makes, I know, in Dune Part 2 in particular, caught some people off guard. I rather like them quite a bit. He has a very, in this film at least, a very mythic style that feels not just influenced by, or at least that feels not just, superficially influenced by, but on the subtextual level, as is appropriate, by David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia in almost every part, but also some of the other great desert epics as well. Now, what I think is interesting too about the filmmaking in Dune, and specifically Part 2, is the fact it's not literal, because there is a lot that deals with, of course, iconography and mythology and all these things, and their images that you'll see in your head in this film that you wouldn't quite believe, specifically the sandworm sequence, which is great. Anybody who says that David Lynch's aborted adaptation from the 80s is a better film is drunk, all right? But it is a very grounded film in its approach to the emotion and also the practicality of this world. Ooh, this is a hard one right here, guys. Probably shouldn't talk while you're doing this shit. But, if I die, I die. Timothée Chalamet is fantastic, and once again Zendaya is fantastic, but the real standout of Dune Part 2 is, of course, as everybody said, is Benicio del Toro. He's brilliant, and he really portrays the kind of devotion and the fanaticism that the entire movie, and indeed the entire book, is about. And it grows from being implicitly comedic to being something rather threatening, especially by the end, which is great stuff. Fantastic film all around. Folks, that's certainly harder to do when you're talking. If I do have a heart attack, you're all responsible, Well, friends, that was quite an experiment, but unfortunately it was 85 goddamn degrees inside that gym, and so I think talking while running or anything else was going to be an experiment in how quick you would see a small leprechaun man have a cardiac infarction. But anyway, we talked about Challengers, we talked about Dune. They're both great films. What else came out this year? Problemista was a... In retrospect, I was a lot more positive on it when I reviewed it than I am now. It was a piece of shit. Okay. Here's a much debated film by the denizens of everywhere, specifically Twitter, because I'm on Twitter too much, we'll say. Alex Garland's Civil War. Thought it was fantastic. You know what I mean? Now here's the thing about that. It goes out of its way. Oh, yeah. That's great. Yippee little motherfuckers. It goes out of its way to not put too specific a button on the politics of what it's talking about, right? This big, giant, revolutionary civil war, obviously, of the future. It goes out of its way to be more about journalism and the ethics of journalism and things like that. Now, of course, the trick is, that Garland plays, is that there's a much more complicated political thing happening in the background that I think is really, really cool. It's clear what the film is about. It could not have been made at any other time than this, and I think it's very clear that, of course, Alex Garland is a very left-leaning filmmaker. Of course, he's also got a brain, is the thing, which For some people, they think he didn't go far enough. I think he did perfectly fine in creating what is basically a, you know, a you are there speculative fiction, uh, you know, uh, 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 epic. You know what I mean? It's a road movie in terms of structure, and I always like road movies. Kirsten Dunst is fantastic, in particular. One thing I will say, though, is that if I hear anybody talk about it and I hear them use the word neoliberal ever again, I'm going to shit myself in anger. Okay. What else is good? What's good here, Mike? Oh, right. There's Jane Schoenbrun's fantastic I Saw the TV Glow, right? Which is an elaboration on some of the ideas she had in We're All Going to the World's Fair, which I liked, but it did feel kind of like a rough draft. This is a brilliant film that is basically, on one hand, it is an allegory for trans coming out and things like that, and trans identity and all these things. But of course, you could take that metaphor a bit further, and you can make it a bit more general. It's about any kind of subsumed identity that has to come out. But what's really great about it, for me at least, because I'm fascinated by this stuff, is that it's also, I think, the purest analog horror film that we've seen so far, right? More than Skinamarink, which I thought was an experiment. I wouldn't say it was by any means a great film, but I did like it a lot for its use of atmosphere. This, though, takes it all the way, and I like that quite a bit. Brilliant stuff all the way through. It's in its own way. It feels like a combination of like a Goosebumps cover by Tim Jacobus, I think his name is, maybe, and then like Twin Peaks, and then there's a lot of a type of ennui that you used to find in like mumblecore cinema, but of course reconstructed for what it's about. There's all these elements working together, and then of course the pervasive gloom and doom and almost cosmic cynicism of the analog horror element, which I really like a lot. A lot of neon, which always appeals to me. I love neon. And purple. Oh, I love purple. I would also say too, Dev Patel's Monkey Man was a standout this year. I really liked it a lot. Now, again, this is a film that I think a lot of people called out as not having bona fide action, accolades, or whatever. Those people are wrong once again, and I will fight every single one of them. It's great stuff. Dev Patel, of course, I don't know his history, but something does tell me that he comes from a rather privileged part of India, but to his credit, he's actually rather self-aware about that fact, and he makes his film specifically about the Indian, caste system, which is, or caste system. And it's great stuff. He turns it into, of course, a really pure, a really primal genre epic. Some would say it's self-serving because it is about him and how great he is and all this kind of stuff and whatever, but he's got the accolades, man. He's really about it. And not just in terms of his on-screen performance, but also in terms of the editing, of the momentum, the visceral pace, the way that everything looks and feels, the shot structure, the composition, and things like that. There is, outside of the hagiographical elements about him as the character himself, there's also a lot of implicitly mythic elements that I liked a lot. It was really, really great, Fantastic stuff, fantastic. Excellent directorial debut. And I tend to separate those into two categories: directorial debuts that, came from somebody already established that had money behind them from a studio and things like that, or of course directorial debuts that came from nowhere. Two different categories, and you can't really judge them the same way. And I think this is a fantastic directorial debut in the former category. This year, I think, was also filled with, either well-intentioned misfires or films whose reach just exceeded their grasp. That's just how it goes, But I still enjoyed pretty much everything that I saw in theaters this year. It was a very solid year, and I didn't even get out to the theaters to see very many new contemporary releases as much as I wanted to, comparatively speaking. I'm not counting, like, repertory screenings, of course. I've been to quite a few of those this year. But I would say, The Fall Guy was a lot of fun. It was easy. It was breezy. It was beautiful. It was CoverGirl. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, I think, was, it was nowhere near as interesting as Matt Reeves' trilogy. It didn't really have the same kind of auteurist perspective. And some people call Matt Reeves a workman. I don't think that's true at all. When you watch his films, you can tell he's just, he is a studio director, but also an auteur as well. Um, you can tell it's him from the very first frame of every one of his films, even if they all start off as IP, rather. Um, IP. But Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is a rather traditional sort of hero's journey that takes place in the same world that he created, projected forward like 200-300 years, whatever it is. It's very simple, but it is a lot of fun. Because you get to see how that world's changed a little bit and things like that. There's a larger story happening that I wonder if they're going to run that right into some sort of reimagined Planet of the Apes Part 1. We'll see, right? Twisters, I thought was pretty fun. It's pretty all right. Yeah, it has our local hometown hero, Glen Pal, in it. I have further thoughts on the film, I mean, it's a Twisters sequel. I'm not going to say Jan de Bont's original was by any means the best film of its year, even in popcorn cinema, but it was a lot of fun, and this film is a lot of fun, so it's a good solid sequel. But I will say I did miss the presence of like people who looked like regular people with wrinkles and gray hair and lines in their face and things like that. For all its considerable pluses, for all of their considerable pluses, Glen Pal, Daisy Edgar Jones, Anthony Ramos is a standout. I liked him quite a bit. Everybody does a rather solid job, but at the same time, they look like movie stars. The original Twister. It had people who were older, who looked like regular people. And I miss that in cinema. I miss that a lot. It's a world of fillers and buccal fat removals. That's what we're in right now, as far as movies go, with few exceptions. Speaking of Glen Pal, we also had Richard Linklater's rather solid but uneventful and unambitious Hitman, which I also rather enjoyed quite a bit. Richard Linklater is a curious filmmaker for me to talk about because, of course, he's also a hometown hero, but I've never really been able to explain myself to his films with few exceptions. I love Dazed and Confused, Slacker, and Before Sunset. I have not seen any of his other, or I have not seen any of the others in the trilogy. But he's a great filmmaker, full of ideas. He's of the two hometown heroes that we have, or three really, counting Terrence Malick, of the three filmmakers that we have here in town, and really of the two bad boy filmmakers we have here in town, so to speak, of the 90s. Where Rodriguez is motivated, of course, more by people like Carpenter and Miller and other people like that, Richard Linklater is more motivated by like Eric Romer, and there's other comparisons that I can't think of right now because I'm sweat brain, so to speak. But yeah, that's always been kind of his thing, and Hitman is very much kind of a piece. It's it's one of his. It's kind of right in the middle of his, more, subdued sort of humanist films, and then also his kind of over-the-top comedy films like your School of Rock and things like that. I liked it quite a bit. I thought it was enjoyable. Those are the notables. I mean, I saw a lot more, but Deadpool and Wolverine was fun. That was a lot of fun. Don't look at my teeth, by the way. I've got bad teeth. Deadpool and Wolverine was a lot of fun. It's not ambitious. Don't go to it for ambition. You got your ambitious Wolverine movie a few years ago with Logan. This is not that. This is like an Austin Powers movie, basically, in tights. Go and enjoy it. I will say there are some rather stark implications about, Disney and their hegemony over culture and things like that we could definitely get into at length. But, on its own, as a film, it is harmless. It is fun. Go and enjoy it. And now I'm going to go enjoy lunch. Have a great afternoon.